We are going to begin with a short meditation before I introduce the lads tonight. Welcome to Positive Nights. Tonight we're going to explore the work of Inwardbound, and we're going to have we're going to do it slightly differently tonight. The lads are going to present 20 minutes each. Dara's going to begin, and then Rob is going to take over from there. So this is Dara Stewart, and that's Rob Coffey there from Inwardbound. And the lads have been up to this work now for about 3 years, and they've been running retreats in Amsterdam, and they've been working primarily with psilocybin and MDMA as well. Rob, is that correct?
No, just psilocybin.
No. Psilocybin. Okay. And we're going to talk and explore tonight the therapeutic benefits of all of this kind of work. So before we begin that, I'm going to do what we always do and just do a little connection exercise, small little short meditation. And I'm going to invite you all now to just close your eyes and drop into your heart center. And just really feel yourself letting go of the day and grounding into your body. Just feel your energy drop from the head to the heart. It's a very short space between your head and your heart, but frequency-wise, it's quite a significant move. You're moving from the language of thinking to the language of feeling. Let's take a couple of breaths now into your heart center. And really feel yourself relaxing on the out breath. Just familiarize yourself now with this heart space. And the energy of the heart is very much non-judgmental. It's compassionate. So this space is a good space to sit in for the talk tonight. Let go of the need to judge and just feel into what resonates with you from what you hear tonight, and just let go of the rest. So really let the mind fade into the background and bring that heart energy to the forefront. Feel yourself very centered now, very relaxed, very calm. And feel that sense of resonance in your body, heart resonance. As you open your eyes, when you're ready. And as I said, you're all very welcome to Positive Nights. These are the events now. We're all running them on Zoom for Positive Life magazine. And my guests, I've spoken to these chaps before, and I was so impressed by their wealth of knowledge around this area. And we need this because lots of people are going off on different strands with this work. And we really need people who know their stuff to advise us. And on Sunday, we had Martin Duffy, who's a similar flavor to the lads. And I know the lads have worked with him as well. So I'm really glad to be able to hand this over tonight and know that you're all in very, very capable hands. And these guys really know their stuff. So let's welcome them, first of all, to Positive Nights. Dara and Rob, do a little wave if you can, whatever you want to do to welcome them. And we'll begin, I think, with Dara. So Dara, take it over there for 20 minutes and bring us through your journey with this work.
Thanks, Paul. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thanks again, Paul, for having us on again. It just brings me back to when the world was normal, when we had the event in the Grand Central in Dublin city centre, and it's been such a journey since then, I can tell you that much. But hello everybody, my name is Darragh Stewart. My background is I'm a trained scientist. I trained for over 10 years. I got my PhD in plant genetics. And how I really got involved in this work was in my early 20s, I went through a bit of a dark night of the soul. In the space of a year, I had been involved in a breakup of a long-term relationship. I experienced the death of my grandmother, who I was very close to, and I was in the middle of my PhD studies. So I had this sort of existential, high anxiety, depressive period of my life where I sought for answers and looked for my own inner healing. And this sort of set me on a course of kind of looking inward. First of all, I started off with meditation, yoga. I was getting a lot of massage therapy at the time, so I found that profoundly healing. So I actually trained as a massage therapist over the space of a year. And I got really involved in the holistic way of living. So very quickly I was introduced to plant medicine, and there was really no going back then. So I've been working quite intimately with psilocybin containing magic mushrooms since my early 20s, and we're going into the third year now with running the psilocybin retreats in the Netherlands. This has been my main work. I also run men's circles and hold men's workshops, and we held our first men's retreat this year, which I also do this with Rob, and this has been really deeply rewarding work to watch the unfolding of men step more and more into vulnerability and talking about their feelings and emotions. So I'm very fortunate to be doing the work that I'm doing. I've also taken a step back from full-time lab research, and I'm now pursuing facilitating the Inwardbound retreats and also carrying out research on the retreats to hopefully add to the psychedelic science renaissance that we're currently having. So I have a short little presentation just to really introduce you all to what we're working with at Inwardbound. So can you all see that, Paul? Yeah? Great. So we're working with mushrooms, which are a fungus, and we're really lucky because in the Netherlands, mushrooms are illegal, but the underground part of mushrooms, known as the mycelial network or the hyphae, which is the main body of the mushroom, is technically legal. So what makes a mushroom magic? Well, it is this molecule known as psilocybin. And what mushrooms really are, they're the fruits of the mycelial network, or the fruits of the fungus. So when the time is right, when the environmental conditions are right, the mycelial network, which is under the ground, decides to fruit, produces this beautiful mushroom, which then sends spores to colonize the land around it. So magic mushrooms have this molecule known as psilocybin, and psilocybin is an indole alkaloid, and it belongs to the family of psychoactive substances known as the tryptamines. So there's different families of psychedelic substances. LSD is ergolines. There's mescaline, which is the phenethylamines, and tryptamine, DMT, 5-MeO, DMT. They all belong to the tryptamine family of psychedelic substances. So magic mushrooms contain psilocybin and also this other molecule known as psilocin. So psilocybin is really known as a prodrug. When it's ingested into the body, it is dephosphorylated, it's broken down and converted into a smaller molecular weight molecule known as psilocin. Psilocin then enters your bloodstream, goes into the brain, and it acts as a neurotransmitter. So it works in the brain, causes different chemical reactions in the brain, which produce different effects. Psilocybin binds to a receptor complex in the brain known as the 5-HT2A receptor complex, which is part of the serotonin system. So we all know the serotonin system as the happy, feel-good hormone that we get when maybe we eat some chocolate, we go for a run, and then it also indirectly affects the dopamine system. So that's why there's this really huge excitement in the field of mental health at the moment, because psilocybin and psilocin bind at this receptor complex, which conventional antidepressants or SSRIs don't bind. So that's why people who have treatment-resistant depression and chronic anxiety are now finding relief by working with psilocybin. And Rob is going to talk a lot more about that in his presentation. So one of the things about psilocybin, and this was a study done by Professor David Nutt for the Drug Science Committee in the UK in 2010, is that it's actually really, really safe. It's one of the safest street substances that one can ingest. And this was done in this 2010 study. And very famously, David Nutt came out and said to the UK government at the time that taking LSD, MDMA and mushrooms is actually way more safe than alcohol, heroin and cocaine and tobacco. So ultimately he lost his job for that. But he's gone down as kind of like a psychedelic saint or a psychedelic martyr, and he's still helping to publish papers and inform drug policy around the world. So right down the end here on the right, we can see that there's very little harm to others and little harm to the users when they take mushrooms. Maybe, and you know, it's kind of thought that the harm to users is people maybe falling over or maybe using heavy machinery or driving after they've ingested mushrooms, which is never a good idea. So very, very, very safe to take. So how do we come across magic mushrooms? And there's this huge resurgence in people working with plant medicine and working with indigenous traditions. And the story of magic mushrooms really starts with this woman, Maria Sabina, in Mexico in the late 1950s. She was a curandero, or some of you might know the term shaman or medicine woman. And the American banker, or the American PR consultant for JP Morgan, the big American bank known as Gordon Wasson, he was an amateur mycologist, and he heard of these mushrooms causing strange visions and strange feelings in Mexico. And he went to try and find the tribe where this was happening, and he came across Maria Sabina. So he was allowed to watch the ceremonies originally at the start and then eventually partake. So it's thought that he was one of the first Westerners to sit in on a psilocybin medicine ceremony or shamanic medicine ceremony. And at the time, this was all documented in Life magazine, very sensational at the time. A New York banker goes to Mexico mountains to participate in the age-old ritual of Indians who chew strange growths that produce visions. So really sensational at the time. It kind of captured the thoughts and the sort of minds of the young America in 1957. So a lot of people wanted to try this out for themselves. And, you know, this was on the cusp of the 60s. So Gordon Wasson gave the magic mushrooms to the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann. And some of you might know him as the scientist who discovered LSD. So he found that the active principle in magic mushrooms in 1959 was psilocybin. So this was just at the start of the 50s. And for those of you who are old enough, I wish I personally was, you'll know what came next. Well, it was the 60s, the hippie movement, counterculture, flower power. Timothy Leary, the Harvard professor, famously said, turn on, tune in, drop out. So there was this huge sort of counterculture to what was going on in America. And around this time as well, it was amazing. There was amazing work going on at the time. Rob's going to talk a little bit about this. People were using LSD and psilocybin in clinical trials in the 1960s to treat people with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and a host of mental illnesses. But unfortunately, what happened was the backlash against people refusing to draft for the Vietnam War. And Nixon and Reagan started the war on drugs, unfortunately, and this was also tied in with a lot of racist tension at the time. There's a really great book, Chasing the Scream, which really covers the war on drugs and how ultimately, because of this backlash, America has, or the United States has informed drug policy across the world. So there was a complete ban on any psychoactive substance in the 1960s. All clinical medical research was completely cancelled. And then unfortunately, America, basically using their strong arm, said that to most other countries that if you don't ban them too, we're going to pull your funding for all the projects that you are that we're funding. So this is all in this book, and it's really interesting to see how the complete stop on psychedelic substances happened. But right now we're really fortunate because there is a revival going on at the moment, and the FDA in the United States has just designated psilocybin as a breakthrough therapy, similar with MDMA. So we're starting to live now in this second psychedelic science renaissance. So for psilocybin, they've started to do lots of studies across the world, particularly in Imperial College London, under the guise of Robin Carhart Harris, and similarly in the United States. The first psychedelic science center was opened in the United States at Johns Hopkins Medical University. And Ronald Griffiths, he's really heading the work there, and he has been working for many years with many different types of psychedelics. So what really happens to the brain when psilocybin is ingested? So on the left-hand side, we can see a placebo or just a sugar cube given to somebody, and then some pure psilocybin on the right-hand side. So we see that this is different points in the brain. So these different dots here on the outside are the different parts of the brain known as the nodes. And we can see when psilocybin is ingested, there is this huge lighting up of the brain. There's lots of different crosstalk happening. Parts of the brain that wouldn't normally interact are now interacting. And this is really why it's thought people get these creative boosts from using psilocybin, insights, realizations, shift in perception, different states of consciousness, is because all these different parts of the brain are now talking to one another. So one of the really interesting things about psychedelics and psilocybin is how different parts of the brains are differentially regulated. So here we can see in orange that the frontal cortex of the brain, where we do this high process kind of thinking, is really enhanced. So we get an increase in this part of the brain where we do high level thinking, problem solving, and all these higher cognitive functions. But very interestingly, and what's really sparked the imagination of a lot of people, is that the blue part here in the brain is actually depressed, or what happens is the blood flow to this area is reduced. So there's less signaling happening here in the brain. This part is known as the default mode network. So it's the part of the brain that ruminates when you're on autopilot, when you're just relaxing and thinking. It's also where a lot of your habits and your patterns are made. So when we ingest something like psilocybin or another psychedelic, this part of the brain is reduced, and you start to experience sometimes what is known as ego death or ego loss. So this part of the brain is also where it's thought the seat of the ego is. So Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about this, and I know he has been on Positive Night before, where this is where you label yourself, where your identity, who you think you are, what you think you are in the world, is really tied. So when this part of the brain is sort of dampened, we can start to see ourselves a little bit differently. We can introduce new belief systems, new ways of viewing the world. So, and this apparently stays after. So this is how psilocybin and psychedelics are now being used in conjunction with counseling, because new belief systems, new patterns, new habits can then be brought in after a psychedelic experience. So it makes the brain a bit more malleable. Psilocybin is also known to work in the brain and increase neurogenesis, so new neurons forming, and this phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. And Dr. Joe Dispenza talks a lot about this, how basically you can try and rewire your brain, or neurons that wire together. So you're trying to bring in new belief patterns, new ways of being in the world, and trying to solidify those neural pathways. And then you try and lose these old pathways that no longer serve you. So very, very fascinating what psychedelics actually are doing to the brain, and amazing research is still going on. And Rob's going to talk a little bit about more of the psychological research in his section next. So the current clinical trials for psilocybin, there's a whole host of trials happening at the moment, but just a few of them here: addiction, smoking cessation. Psilocybin therapy has been shown to reduce people's want for smoking, end-of-life anxiety, people with terminally ill cancer, or chronic feelings of dying. So University of Melbourne is doing psilocybin assisted therapy for people with terminal cancer. Religious practitioners have also been getting high doses of psilocybin. There was a paper out in Nature last year where they gave Buddhist meditators who'd done over 10,000 hours 2 high doses of psilocybin, and they recounted their experiences to comparing it to meditation. And interestingly enough as well, it's so important to have a grounded meditation practice before you do any psychedelics, as they showed they had little fear and little anxiety compared to the people who hadn't done meditation. Also, healthy volunteers are getting it to see how it physiologically works in the brain. People who have eating disorders, major depressive disorder, and treatment-resistant depression, like I touched on a little bit earlier. So people who have taken conventional SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, conventionally known as antidepressants, and these haven't worked for people. Now they're giving these people high doses of psilocybin, and Rob will talk a little bit about such the positive results that we're seeing at the moment. Also, psilocybin has been shown to work for people with chronic cluster headaches, and there's also clinical trials going on for people with obsessive compulsive disorder. So many things are being checked at the moment, and this is very similar with all the psychedelics, because the stigma is really reducing at the moment. People are seeing these substances as actually having medicinal value, which is really wonderful. So here in our very own Ireland, there are clinical trials happening now. 7 people with severe depression have been brought into a study in Tala Hospital in Dublin, and apparently the results are proving very successful. The criteria to work on the clinical trials is very strict, and it's really good to note that psilocybin and psychedelics aren't for everybody. So if you have a familial history of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or any other diagnosed mental health illness, that it may not be for you. So unfortunately, at our retreats, we have to reject a lot of applications based on people who are on SSRIs or some other medication that is contraindicated or have been clinically diagnosed. But we do point those people towards the clinical trials that are happening in the UK and the United States, and hopefully they might be able to get onto those. So another reason, not just coming because you have a mental illness or are suffering from depression or mild depression or anxiety, one of the main reasons that a lot of people come is for the entheogenic experience, or the spiritual and mystical experience. So these are kind of like the direct experiences that you have to experience yourself. And like the Buddha famously said, don't believe me, sit on your cushion and experience it for yourself. Same for me, don't believe it, go and try plant medicine and experience it for yourself. So what are these sort of entheogenic experiences? Well, they're feelings of oneness, having this ego dissolution, complete loss of identity, of your labels, of who you are in the world, a connection to something greater than yourself, meeting your ancestors, your past loved ones, so very shamanic in a lot of ways, meeting spirits, guides or angels, or those who are looking out for you, having this transcendence and connecting to your higher self or your greater self. And some people will say divine union with a godlike figure, the ultimate realization that you are God, like Alan Watts says, and transcending space and time to enter places like the void in Buddhism. For me personally, I grew up in Ireland in a Catholic family. I really enjoyed the ritual of going to church, but I never really deeply connected to that spiritual side of myself. It was kind of just going with the flow, like probably most Irish people in their 30s. But for me, my whole life really changed, and I got a real deep understanding of the spiritual nature of my life, which was very fascinating because I'm a scientist, and a lot of scientists have completely disowned the spiritual aspect of their lives because it's very hard to directly experience these things. But through psilocybin, I've experienced a lot and have ultimately started to live a life that is more true and more authentic and more connected to the natural world. So beautiful substances to have those mystical experiences and spiritual experiences. And a lot of people that come on our retreat have done a lot of meditation, have done a lot of yoga, have these general spiritual practices, but never actually made that bridge to having the spiritual experience that they're looking for. And that's where psilocybin can come in and give you almost that little nudge and give you that little push to really shift your consciousness. Also really interesting to note that the people that come on the retreat looking for this mystical type experience or the spiritual experience actually have more beneficial outcomes when they do have these experiences. And this has been really documented since 2006 by Roland Griffiths. And it's really fascinating that people who have these spiritual experiences, they 14 months later, they still say that they're some of the most significant moments in their lives, even more significant than watching their child being born or married to their other half. So it just really shows you that the power of what psilocybin can induce. So I'll talk a little bit about the retreats, and this has really become my main work over the last 3 years, and same with Rob. So what we basically do is we work in the Netherlands because it's fully legal there. We'd love to be working in Ireland, but unfortunately, with the drug laws, psilocybin containing mushrooms are currently illegal. But like what's happening in the United States with all the decriminalized plant medicine movements, hopefully we will have a retreat center within Ireland in, please God, the next 5 years. And then we'll be able to hold these retreats here. So we have a full retreat program, which is really centered around the 5-day retreat. So before the retreat, you have a group preparation call, a one-to-one counseling session. You get all the necessary info and information and exercises before you come on the retreat. The retreat is 5 days, and we do 2 high doses of psilocybin containing truffles. And then we also have a full day of integration. On the retreat, we also do meditation, yoga, breath work, nature connection, and a lot of group processing work, where some of the absolute magic and the gems come from. Sitting in those circles and hearing about people talk so deeply about their suffering and their struggles, how they're trying to navigate themselves in the world, gives you such a strong sense of our common sense of humanity, that we're all ultimately in it together, and we all struggle, and we're all trying to look for our inner healing, bliss, and joy in life. So after the retreat as well, you get a group integration call, a one-to-one counseling session to make sure you're integrating everything that you learned on the retreat and discovered about yourself. And then we also have an online community where people stay in touch. So unfortunately, this year has been a bit of a struggle for us, that most of our retreats are cancelled. But next year, we're running 8 retreats, with our next in February. So if you're interested in coming to the February retreat or any of those, you can drop me an email to dara@inwardbound.nl, and we'd love to see you, some of you there. And we've actually had people who've come to the last Positive Nights talk on some of our retreats. So big thanks to you, Paul, for helping us reduce the stigma around what we're trying to do in the world, ultimately trying to hold this space for people to do their own healing. I'm very, very fortunate and very humbled to be able to help just be there for people and guide them through this process based on my own life experience. And this has really been a big passion and a joy in my life. So hopefully we can keep getting this work out to those who need it, spread the peace, love, and joy that everyone deserves. So that's it for me, everybody. If you have any questions on my part of the talk, please drop them in the chat now, so I can have a look over them and prepare my answers. And then I think we'll have some time at the end to do some Q&A. So Gura Mila Malgut, Gura Moore, thank you, everybody. Over to you, Paul.
That's great, Dara. Thanks, man. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So informative. Some great information there. Yes, as Dara said there, if people want to type their questions in, I'm going to keep everybody on mute, so it's much easier that way. But just type your questions in, and we'll go through the Q&A. We'll spend at the end at least another 20 minutes, 25 minutes going through the Q&A. So thanks for that, Dara. That was great, man. Appreciate that. And now we go over to Rob. Rob?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Dara. And thanks, Paul, for this opportunity. My name is Rob Coffey. I'm a psychotherapist, IACP pre-accredited. I work in private practice as a psychotherapist, and I also trained since 2013 at the Irish Centre for Shamanic Studies, Dundee Park, under the great mentor Martin Duffy. And I've been training there for a long time. So in my own journey of healing, I suppose I came to plant medicine. My first psilocybin experience was 25 years ago as a teenager in Ireland, like many people maybe. And it was a very powerful experience which changed my life forever. And it's interesting that years later I came back to plant medicine, to ayahuasca and the different psychedelic medicines. And just to say, we're talking about psilocybin mostly tonight, but to recognize that all of the classic psychedelics, so that's DMT through ayahuasca, mescaline, peyote, San Pedro, and also DMT and 5-MeO-DMT have a very great potential to heal and to help people. But also the talk I'm giving is about the science, the maps of consciousness, but the challenges of this work, and there are challenges. So it's important. It's really important that we as practitioners acknowledge the difficulties around this. So the focus is on psilocybin because that's where most of the scientific research is. And LSD as well, of course. LSD takes a lot longer. An LSD journey takes about 15 hours sometimes, as opposed to a psilocybin one of 5 to 6. So that's the main reason most of the current science is based around psilocybin rather than LSD. Basically, the psychotherapist got lazier. It's really hard work to hold a space for 6 hours, let alone 15 hours. So I've so much respect for those therapists back in the 60s who were doing this. So I'm going to talk. Let me show you. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is the promise and challenges of psychedelic therapy. So there's three things I want to look at. First of all, the current science, which Dara's touched on, around psilocybin and MDMA. Secondly, my real passion, which is around maps of consciousness, and that's the psychic and psychological maps that are being created by the great minds and psychologists of the 20th century and 21st century. And then looking at the challenges, because there are challenges, and it would not be a good idea to minimize those. So just a long quote to begin, but this is from Robert Carhart-Harris, the head of the Psychedelic Research Unit of Imperial College London. So it's psychedelic therapy. What is it? It's much more than it's a much more comprehensive treatment package than usual therapy. It entails a small number of psychologically supported dosing sessions, flanked by assessment, preparation, and integration. Psychedelics appear to increase brain plasticity, which, broadly speaking, implies an accelerated ability to change. One view is that a psychedelic experience is a consequence of an especially intense surge of plasticity that opens a window of opportunity for lasting therapeutic change. The same windows may open up in other extreme states, such as experiencing trauma, stress-induced breakdown, a spontaneous spiritual experience, or coming close to death. However, the difference with psychedelic therapy is that the experience is carefully prepared for, contained, and mediated. If not done this way, the use of psychedelics can be dangerous. The impact of successful psychedelic therapy is often one of revelation or epiphany. People speak of witnessing the bigger picture, placing things in perspective, accessing deep insight about themselves and the world, releasing pent-up mental pain, feeling emotionally and physically recalibrated, clear-sighted, and equanimous. This is very different from people's descriptions of the effect of SSRIs, where a contrasting feeling of being emotionally muted is not uncommon. So this quote very much kind of summarizes what we have experienced on our retreats in the Netherlands. So look, I just want to look first of all at the psilocybin for depression studies. So depression or major depressive disorder is a substantial public health concern. About 300 million people worldwide are affected by it, a huge number. In 2014, 17% of the EU population had depression, and 14% or 12% have chronic depression in Ireland, which is the highest in Europe. So there's three studies I want to share with you. This is the first one, the Griffith Study from 2016 from Johns Hopkins. High-dose psilocybin produced large decreases in clinician and self-rated measures of depressed mood and anxiety, along with increased quality of life, life meaning and optimism, and decreases in death anxiety. At a 6-month follow-up, these changes were sustained, with about 80% of participants continuing to show clinically significant decreases in depressed mode and anxiety. So that was the first major study of the new wave. The second one was this one here from Robert Carhart-Harris, Imperial College London, and Beckley Foundation. Again, looking at depression over time. You can see on the left here, the baseline. After week 1, a significant reduction in the level of depression, and that was sustained up to 3 months afterwards. You can see on the right there. So a very significant study showing the effect of psilocybin on severe, this is treatment-resistant depression, i.e. people who've been depressed for many years. The third and final study, which came out 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, this is from the Journal of the American Medical Association Psychiatry, so a very prestigious American scientific journal. And it was the first randomized clinical trial, so the first, gold standard scientific trial at Johns Hopkins, again, 24 participants with depression. And the findings were quite extraordinary. It showed that when psilocybin is administered in the context of supportive psychotherapy, approximately 11 hours, it produced large, rapid, and sustained antidepressant effects in patients with major depression. And this is really interesting, the last point. Bear with me, it's a lot of information, I know. The impact reported in this study were approximately 2.5 times greater than the impact found in psychotherapy, and more than 4 times greater than the impact found in pharmacological depression studies. What does that mean? It means that psilocybin, when combined with psychotherapy, has been shown to be 2.5 times more effective than psychotherapy on its own, and 4 times more effective than antidepressants. These studies are quite extraordinary, the results, I mean. I just want to mention very briefly, we don't use MDMA as in a therapeutic context, but I would like to just say that in the US, MDMA should be approved by the Federal Drugs Administration by 2023 for the use with PTSD and trauma, and that the clinical results from that are actually extraordinary. So that's a whole other conversation, and that's happening. But these will be the two initial substances, so psilocybin and MDMA, to get federal approval in the United States to work with psychotherapeutically. When they are going to be available in Ireland is a whole different question. But once this happens in the United States, I feel that there'll be an impetus for us to follow suit. Okay. Okay. So that's the science. Now we get on to the really interesting part, or for me, the really interesting part, because this is my area of deep speciality and love. So this is Carl Jung. And some of these great minds of the 20th century, Carl Jung being one of them, mapped out for us the terrain, beginning with Freud, I suppose, and mapped out the human unconscious and the psyche. And Jung especially was a pioneer of this work, and he was a scientist, he was a doctor, an intellect, but also very influenced by Eastern mysticism. So you're looking at a Tibetan mandala, or Jung is looking at a Tibetan mandala, because of course the great Eastern mystics mapped this territory long before Western scientists. And Jung did this work without using psychedelics. He did it through dream analysis and mapping the subconscious that way. But for us mere mortals, psychedelics can really help get into the terrain of our psyche and our deep unconscious. So this, I'm going to show you the next slide, a very basic map of the psyche. So this will be a very basic map of the conscious part of our brain on top. Now, when we talk about our conscious mind, it's important to remember that the unconscious is something we're not aware of. So anything unconscious or subconscious, we are not aware of. We can't be by definition. So when we talk about unconscious drivers of our behavior, it's things that we consciously can't be aware of. And a lot of the work of this therapy and therapy in general is helping people discover what's going on beneath the surface of their unconscious and bringing light. Jung called it shining light on the unconscious to make it conscious, is one of the fundamental goals of humanity, to individuate as human beings. So how do we do this work? Well, there are many ways, and you don't have to use psychedelics to do it, that's for sure. Dream analysis, any form of therapy, but definitely psychedelics can help. So in this middle part, we have the personal unconscious. This is our personal history, our stories of what happened to us as a child, the things we've forgotten. Everything that we've ever forgotten is in our personal unconscious. Trauma, our personal traumas. But of course, for many people in the therapeutic world, they become aware quite quickly that their personal unconscious or the personal life story does not reflect the depth of the feeling of the unconscious. And this is where Jung was such a genius, because he recognized the power of the bottom part here, the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious goes way beyond our own personal biography. So for example, at the moment, the amount of anxiety in the world would be in the personal unconscious. I mean, everyone I know is anxious, practically. Be very surprised if someone hadn't got some level of anxiety at the moment. So that would be an example of something that's in the collective unconscious. Other things that would be there will be our family history, our generational traumas, our epigenetic traumas passed down. And as Irish people, of course, we have many of that, so much of that. 7 or 14 generations back, they've shown that trauma can be handed down. So we as Irish people are carrying trauma from the famine and before the famine, and the loss of the land and the colonial legacy. And what came from that? Well, of course, alcoholism, abuse, shame, so much toxicity. That would be an example of something that would be in the collective unconscious. an example would be on a retreat where we had a young German client in his 20s, young, strong, fit guy, have a cathartic release of just such anger and fear and pain, and there was nothing in his own personal history that could explain where this came from. And this went on for hours on one of our psychedelic journeys. It was tremendous to witness. And his sense of what he was releasing was his ancestral, his grandfather fought in the Second World War. And his sense was that he was releasing material from that time, that it wasn't his. Whether it's true or not, but that was his sense, and I believe that was the case. Also, of course, and let's look at a more detailed, this is a very simple map. And of course, at the top there, it says it's in the body. So it's very important to recognize that the body keeps the score of what goes on in our subconscious. So frequently the subconscious will manifest in a form of a pain or something that you will feel, a feeling, especially in the psychedelic journey. This is a more in-depth map. This is a better, a more in-depth map of Jung's psyche. This is a simpler or more in-depth map of Jung's psyche. So of course we got the ego and the persona, our projected image of ourselves on the world. And a lot of psychedelic work can be around ego dissolution and breaking free of the bounds of our ego, especially if we've been very conditioned, which most of us have as Irish people, or generally. The conditioning is very strong. So psychedelics can help with deconditioning agent. They're deconditioning agents. So down here, of course, you got the shadow. And Jung talked about the shadow as the repressed or hidden or disowned parts of ourself. And it's associated with evil, but that's not good, or the dark, but it's not really that. The shadow can be very beautiful. It can be, Jung said there's gold in the shadow. And I'll give you an example. With ayahuasca in particular, you'll have many people who've lost their voice. They were told as a child not to speak or not to sing, and they don't have a voice. And I've seen it many times myself with ayahuasca, where people will rediscover their voice through plant medicine. Suddenly they'll be able to sing when they could never sing before. So you could say then that their voice was in the shadow. And that can be a difficult process. So anyone who thinks this work is easy, it's not easy. It's very challenging, and it can be one of the most challenging things you'll ever do in your life. It can also be very beautiful, but that's why it's good to have a guide. So if people do this work on their own, well and good, but it does help, especially when you're doing this deep shadow work, deep unconscious work, to have someone there who can hold the space, and also who can frame it, help you frame the experience, because it can be terrifying. Now, it can also, that is if you're dealing with your fears and you're dealing with your deepest, fear can come up, but fear can come up to be shown, to be seen, to be released, not to be, and that is an experience we would have a lot with people. And if people understand that, why they're going to these places, if they understand that, they say they connect into really, an example actually would be someone who is really angry. We get clients on retreats who get very, very angry. They're just feeling angry, and they can be angry at us, and they can be angry at, they're just angry. And what can happen through the psychedelic experience is that they get in touch with the deeper emotion, which is sadness. And beneath the anger, the defense mechanism of anger, there's some deep sadness there that was unconscious, but the psychedelic experience, psilocybin, can help them unlock the sadness and release and cry for maybe the first time in decades for some people. So there's so much in here. I mean, for me, this is fascinating. But then there's also, of course, the archetypes, which Jung described the archetypes as the building blocks, as the ancestral memory as such of humanity. So the mythological motifs that get passed down through myth are the archetypes. And it's a whole other conversation around the archetypes, but very frequently archetypes will become a big part of this work, people connecting in with their archetypes or having encounters with archetypes in different ways. Yeah. And of course the animus, the contrasexual parts of themselves. But I'll leave that for now. So that's one map. It's not the only one. Yeah. So following on from Jung's work was, of course, Joseph Campbell, the incredible mythologist, the hero with 1,000 faces. And he came up with this, the famous hero's journey motif. And he found this was a motif or archetype from all myths. Every culture throughout history pretty much had this version of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is a really good map of the psychedelic journey. And it's a journey from the known into the unknown, into the conscious, into the unconscious. So people hear the call, they might turn up at a call like tonight and look, oh, I'll check this out. That's you. And then they'll want to cross into the unknown, but a lot of fear comes up. It's a threshold. Are you going to cross that threshold? And sometimes a mentor or helper comes along. And then the bottom here, if you hear the call, there'll be challenges and temptations. You go deep into the unconscious, and down in the unconscious is the dragon or demon or whatever it might be that's been holding you back all your life. And of course, no one wants to encounter that demon. But if you do, and you fight it, or you meet it, or you find you actually fall in love with it sometimes, that's where the gold is found. That's where the transformation can occur. That's where the treasure is found. And from that place, transformation can occur. And then you can return back into the known world, the same person, but slightly different. And I think this is a beautiful metaphor for the psychedelic journey. So it requires a degree of bravery, a degree of courage. Yeah. And believe it or not, then this model was used, this is Dr. Ros Watts, the lead psychologist on the Imperial College London psychedelic team, a really great woman. And she came up with this ACEOR model that they're using for psychedelic therapy, which is accept, connect, embody, and what's the last one? Restore. They've just added the or. But this model is actually pretty much very similar to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And the idea is they're using different language. They're using psychological language. So they're talking about experiential avoidance, which is a psychological term. So that means that we avoid things, these things that we avoid all our life, the things we don't want to look at. And we avoid them, and we do anything to avoid them. We got loads of defenses not to look at them, but one day we have to face them, or that's the hero's journey. And the idea is through psychedelic therapy that you will move from avoidance to acceptance. So I can give you an example of that. I was working with someone in a psychedelic integration who had a very, very challenging ayahuasca experience, and she was, in her 60s, but she realized that she'd just been avoiding certain stuff all her life, and the psychedelic experience showed her really clearly, like a very strong mirror of, no, you got to look at this. And she didn't want to look at it. She'd found 1,000 ways not to look at it. She, by her own account, she was an actor, in terms of she wouldn't show, but the psychedelic experience showed her clearly, no, this is the mirror. This is what you need to stop avoiding and looking at this. So it's beautiful to see the mythology and the psychology combining there again. Okay. So yeah, then let's move on to the absolute pioneer of this work, a giant of the field, Dr. Stangroff. Incredible human being. What a man, still alive. I think he's nearly 90 now. And he's been a pioneer of this work since the 1950s. And he personally did about 4,000 psychedelic psychotherapy sessions, mostly with LSD. And he was a founder of transpersonal psychology. And he talked about the wisdom of your own inner healer. So broadly speaking, we work in his tradition, we would say. We'd like to say that because we believe that the individual holds their own power and their own personal healing. So it's not so much the doctor or expert healing the person. It's helping people unlock their own power through the use of the psychedelic experience. So he talked about coexes, which are systems of condensed experience, which are emotionally charged memories from different periods of our lives that resemble each other in the quality of emotional or physical characteristics they share. So an example might be someone who had an experience of being abandoned as a child, an abandonment issue, very common. But then they would repeat that coex throughout all the relationships of feeling abandoned or expecting to be abandoned or then being abandoned. It was almost like a spiral or something that would reoccur in their lifetime and time again. And he found through the use of LSD psychotherapy that these coexes could be discharged, I suppose. And he did this through the holotropic states of consciousness, which are altered states of consciousness. Holotropic meaning moving towards wholeness. So this was what the shamans would have experienced, using these states of consciousness to move towards wholeness. Okay. Yeah. So he used two different formats of psychedelic therapy. So I just want to share these briefly with you. The first was psycholytic psychotherapy, or psycholytic therapy, excuse me. And he did this early on in his career, so 1956 to 67. And he described it as peeling the onions of the unconscious. And it was a large number of successive medium dose LSD sessions with clients. And the idea was removing layer after layer and mapping the personal unconscious. So this was very effective, but it was very demanding. It required a lot of resources. First of all, a serious amount of time and energy on the part of the therapist, and also a lot of LSD, and a willingness of the client to do this work. And also the reliving of complex traumas. So going into these traumas and processing them and catharsizing them. And the basic idea of this approach, his original approach, was that consecutive sessions might make it possible gradually to confront various levels of their unconscious and to resolve deep conflicts and psychopathological symptoms. So that was his first approach. His second approach, when he went to the States, was the psychedelic therapy approach. And this was different. So instead of gradually unfolding different levels of the unconscious as per his original work, his goal here was to facilitate the mystical experience, sometimes bypassing the psychological level. And for this, he used high doses, like very high doses of LSD, 3 sessions with music. So he kind of came up with the format that we use in our retreats in Holland. So using music in a group, high doses. And he found that by facilitating this mystical experience, people would have some form of transformation. So 2 different approaches, both very effective in different ways. So this, as Dara mentioned, it's interesting to see 30 or 40 years later that the work at Johns Hopkins with Imperial College, Johns Hopkins, Dr. Ronald Griffith, showed that it's actually the mystical experience that creates therapeutic change. That has been correlated in the science. So he showed that 72 participants had mystical type experiences, which had personal and spiritual significance. This experience sustained positive changes in their lives, including increased good mood, and better behavioral patterns, better attitudes. Yeah. And then 14 months after participating, 94% of those who received psilocybin said the experiment was one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences of their lives. 39% said that it was the single most meaningful experience. I mean, that's an extraordinary study by any stretch of the imagination. So basically, Groff was proved correct, I think, in a lot of his work. An absolute pioneer. Okay, I know I'm going through this quite quickly, but there's so much to talk about. Then, of course, this comes up so much on our retreats: inner child and trauma. So this bottom photo here is a famous photo from the Burning Man a few years ago of two people, fighting or not communicating, and these 2 inner children, I think that's a very, very beautiful piece of art. And really it summarizes what we have. We find that on a lot of the work that we do, inner child healing is at the core of a lot of the work we can do. That you can call that attachment issues, abandonment issues, but that beautiful inner child. Well, let me just frame this a certain way. I find this comes up in therapy all the time. You know, people want to get in touch with this part, but what we found through psychedelic work is that people can really have an experience of connecting with their inner child and forming or connecting to some form of self-love and compassion, which for me is at the core of much healing work. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not guaranteed, but it happens a lot. And it happens enough to make it really worthwhile, this work. Because about 3 or 4 years ago, I was, trainee psychotherapist, and I've been with this client for many months, and he turned around to me, deep depression, and he turned around to me and goes, "Rob, how do I love myself?" And I was stumped. I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't know how to, and because I didn't, I kind of, this question stayed with me. It's like, well, if we can't love ourselves, if you can't help someone to love themselves, well, what the hell are you doing as a therapist? It challenged me a lot. I still can't make someone love themselves, but what we can do, psychedelics, psilocybin, can help people come to a place of self-love. So that's some of the most beautiful work that I've seen. Of course, and very much to mention, this is very much based on your body. A lot of this psychedelic work is body orientated. It's not some psychedelic vision. It can be, but a lot of the work is somatic, body orientated, and it can be around trauma too. So just 1 second. Yeah, I don't know if people read this book. It's absolutely extraordinary. The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk, a psychiatrist in the United States who's basically turned modern psychiatry on its head. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Just linking most psychiatric conditions with actually trauma and looking about how the body stores that trauma. That would very much resonate with how we're working now and learning to work through the use of psychedelics. And of course, to mention, he wasn't the first. He was standing again on Soldiers of Giants. And this one was an Irish giant. And we happen to, literally and metaphorically, we tend not to, respect our own as much here in Ireland. But Ivor Brown was saying the same thing 30 or 40 years ago. He said that trauma was the root of most psychiatric illnesses. He called it the frozen present. An absolute genius of a man. I've been lucky enough to know him on a personal level a little bit, and what a man. And of course, Gabor Mate on the right there, who also talks a lot about trauma as at the root of addiction. And addiction. And of course, he defines addiction as anything that disconnects you from yourself. So these men were looking at trauma and are looking at trauma as at the root of a lot of what we call psychiatric diagnoses. Yeah. So nearly done on my part of it. So much there, just very brief overview. Talk about that stuff all night on the maps of consciousness and the psychedelic, the therapeutic models that can be used. There's many more, and we could go much deeper into all of them. But before I kind of finish my part of the talk here, I would like to address some of the concerns and the challenges that we face as practitioners in this field. So the first is the obvious one around legality. All of these substances are currently illegal in Ireland. The only clinical trial that's allowed is in Tallaght Hospital, which is great, but everything else is illegal. That's why we do this work in the Netherlands, where it is legal. Ideally, we would be doing it in Ireland. We don't want to be doing it in the Netherlands. It's a lot of energy going over there. We'd much prefer to be doing it here. So there's a whole debate to be had around legality. and that's a field for many practitioners to get together and start some form of movement to try and get some form of legality around this. The second point is around the limitations. So it's definitely not the case that psychedelics can fix or cure everything. They're not a cure-all. They won't fix all your problems. And sometimes people come in with the expectation, you know, that they're going to take this substance and everything will be better and they'll never be depressed again. They'll never be anxious. That's definitely not the case. They help reframe your life and see different things, but then it requires hard work and integration on the part of the practitioner, or the person, should I say, not the practitioner. So you know, there is this massive renaissance. There's going to be this movement by the probably pharmaceutical companies to kind of give this to everyone, which may or may not be a good thing, because ultimately it requires quite a lot of therapeutic support. All of the studies above were, if you notice, with a lot of psychotherapy as well, and there's a reason for that. It requires a lot of framing, it requires a lot of support, and it's hard work on the part of the therapist. If anyone thinks it's easy, it's not easy. It's very challenging. Yeah, then the second thing is, third thing is around screening. So screening is really, really, really important. We screen very carefully who we take on our retreats. No one with a history of psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar, personality disorders, or severe clinical depression, or addictions. Now, you could argue that they're the people who most need this form of therapy. There is some work out there with, you know, people with more challenging psychiatric conditions, but for us and what we do in Holland, it's a level of holding that we can't provide. It would require a more a clinical setting. So yeah, also around, you know, it's at the moment it's out of the price range of most people. It's out of the, you know, in terms of like working class or people who from kind of disadvantaged backgrounds or ethnic groups probably can't access any of that. So it's a big conversation to be had around that. Does it work for everyone? No, it doesn't. And we never tell anyone, you know, come in one of our retreats and we'll fix you or sort it. Believe it or not, the research done by Timothy Leary back in the 60s was still very accurate to this day. He found that, you know, about 10% of people will have a challenging or very challenging experience. Now, if you can frame that experience as beneficial, if you can see, if the person can see why they had a challenging experience, it can still be therapeutic. But some people actually don't have any psychedelic experience. If people have very strong ego defenses, if they are very caught in their rational mind, and this is what Groff showed as well, it can take, he showed that it would take multiple sessions for the ego to soften and a lot of trust to build up around that. So sometimes people won't even, they can block the experience. And then the fourth or fifth thing, challenging cases. There is definitely a need for supervisory support, I would say, and help for practitioners in this field. There are challenging cases out there. And there is the potential for re-traumatization. If this is not done correctly and properly, people can be re-traumatized through plant medicine, through psychedelic. By that, I mean they can have experiences that actually make them worse rather than better. So it's really important that we acknowledge that, and that's why there needs to be training, a code of ethics around this emerging field. Yeah. And yeah, the need for training, there is, and that to address that, there's no such thing as psychedelic therapists, as trained psychedelic therapists really at the moment in the world. There might be a few places training psychedelic therapists, but really as a profession, it doesn't exist. It's more psychotherapists like myself and clinical psychologists starting to work in the field. So there is a need for that, to address that. There's a need for a code of a need for the ethics around who can be called a psychedelic therapist and what is therapeutic. And I think there's a deep need for writing a code of ethics in Ireland for practitioners. I was involved with writing the code of ethics in the Netherlands for practitioners, and I was involved with writing a code of ethics in Peru for ayahuasca practitioners. But I do feel like there's a need in Ireland for such a thing as well. even though the field is currently illegal. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. Nobody can call themselves, but that's where we're at the moment in this field. So, yeah. So there's loads to talk about in any of those points. I'd be very happy to address any of them, but they're my initial thoughts anyway. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks, Rob. Rob, if you could just move that screen now, are you able to do that?
Oh, yeah. Stop sharing it. Okay.
Brilliant. Okay, that was great. Thanks, man. So there's some questions coming in now, and I'm just gonna ask you both. What we'll try and do is get to every question, so keep the answers as short as you possibly can. Yeah, just so the first one there is from Leanne, and she's just asking, have you read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind? Any comment on that book, either of you? Quite significant book.
Yeah,
Dara?
really great book where a lot of people have actually read that and then come on our retreat. I think he does a really beautiful job on really distilling a lot of the science down and reducing the stigma around a lot of the different substances. So he really does a great job with that. Definitely a great read to anybody. Yeah, there it is. Anybody, if you want an introduction to all of the different types of psychedelics.
Dara, Geraldine is asking you, do you do psilocybin regularly, or is it a one-time experience for a person?
Yeah, so I think the sort of big experiences that you'd have on a retreat, the high doses, some people could do that once or twice on the retreat, and then that's it for the rest of their lives. Some people, it might be a yearly thing that they would do, maybe as part of their personal development or their spiritual practice. And then a lot of people are now microdosing psilocybin, so taking smaller amounts. And this will never, get you to the point of the high doses. Microdosing is more kind of for a little top up, a little daily mood boost, increase in focus, a little bit of increase in creativity, but it won't bring on this cathartic effects that the higher doses will do.
Thanks, Dara. Question there from Carolina is asking, is there any clinical trial yet for women with postnatal depression, and is psilocybin safe during breastfeeding? One of you want to take that one?
I don't know is the answer to that. That would be fascinating subject of study. Probably not, because the science in this area is still quite new, so there's a lot of gaps. I think it would be, I'd have to look into that about the crossing the kind of connection with the child for breastfeeding. But yeah, that's a fascinating question.
That's a good question. Yeah, maybe something worth looking into. Thanks very much, Carolina. From Teresa, Rob has two questions for you. How do you feel about non-psychedelic psychotherapy? And do you still practice other psychotherapy? She's a trainee psychologist. And so let's take the first part first, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel psychotherapy is, an incredible healing modality. And I'm only fully stepping into that role myself now as in private practice, and it is profoundly healing. And I think anyone who comes into psychedelic therapy without having done other forms of therapy or inner work is going to get quite lost quite quickly. We found that the people who get the most benefit are the ones who've done years of inner work, whether therapy or different forms of therapy, and they have kind of some degree of map. They know where they're going a little bit. I think psychedelic therapy without a degree of self-knowledge is actually quite dangerous. I mean, if you're a teenager and you have an overwhelming, that is the thing. So let's talk about the potential for psychosis. And what is psychosis? Psychosis is the spilling out of the subconscious in an unmanageable way. Joseph Campbell said that the mystic was drowning, or the psychotic was drowning in the same waters that the mystic was swimming in. So for that reason, people need support. Definitely, I feel that the best practice model for psychedelic therapy will involve a lot of psychotherapy before and preferably after. But that's very resource heavy. I mean, that's takes a lot of energy, like a lot of time and commitment on the part of both the therapist and the client. So a lot of people don't want to do that. They want the quick fix and they want, like, what's wrong with me? And no, it takes time.
Rob, Teresa was asking as well that she's a trainee psychologist. When she qualifies, she'd love to support journeys as a trip sitter through psychedelic integration psychotherapy. Any advice for her on how to work towards this?
I think she's on the right path. I mean, it's really good that you have psychology training. That's a really good foundation, and I do feel this field is going to grow inevitably. So the more people who are interested in skilled practitioners, the better. I think as ultimately me and Dara are in this to help people. That's our main our fundamental motivation. We always check back in on that intention. Whenever we feel like we're getting kind of caught up in other things, but we come back to are we coming from the right place here? And I think that's the main thing for anyone getting involved with the field, that you're coming from a place of wanting to help. What you're doing to answer that, you seem to be on the right path.
She's on the right track. Thanks for those questions, Teresa. Kevin Gallagher is asking, just Dara, what's the cost of the Netherlands experience?
So the 5-day retreat with the pre and post calls and the one-to-one sessions is €2,000.
We do offer what do you call it, for people who are on low incomes and things. We offer major discounts as well. The fact of the matter is, to run retreats in Holland costs a huge amount of money. To hire the centre, to bring 5 facilitators over from Ireland, it's not cheap, and that is a major issue with this work, that only certain people at the moment can afford it, and perhaps the people who need it the most can't. They don't have access to it. So there's a lot to consider as a field out there of how do we open this up to people from different backgrounds, and
Thank you, Kevin. Leanne Nolan is asking about the legality here in Ireland. She's living in Oregon, where she helped with Measure 109 from Galway, and would love to know what to do to remove taboos at home.
Well, I think part of it is having these conversations, and thank you so much, Paul, for facilitating this. I suppose, a degree of what we see ourselves as being on the front line. That's why we sometimes feel a lot of pressure, because it's really important we get this right, which is a pressure that me and Dara sometimes feel, because we have to be so careful with the language that we use, and we're really trying to speak the language of the establishment, as in the scientific and psychological establishment. Because if you can speak that language, if you can go to them, well, here, look, there's the science. It says it, here in the Journal of the American Medical Association, they'd be a lot more inclined to listen. So that's why we have consciously gone down this road of being open, being transparent. It'd be a lot easier. Many people have been working underground in this field for many years, and that in many ways is easier. But it was a conscious decision to say, no, look, this is what we're doing. So in a way, we kind of see ourselves as advocates. Well, definitely see ourselves as advocates. But we would love help, and if people want to get involved in trying to form a movement to make these substances legal, that would be really great. And to acknowledge that they do need some form of, I don't know if regulation is the correct word, but if there's no regulation and it becomes a complete wild west of it's a bit of a dilemma, in that it could lead to situations like in the 60s when people were damaged. So there's a huge question there to be asked of how do we regulate this field. And I don't claim to have all the answers on that by any means. But it's a very important question to start asking.
There's a question here, if either of you have read The Master and His Emissary, and if you've any thoughts on the left-right hemisphere functions.
I'm not too familiar with it. I have heard some around, is that around the tapping and the kind of different aspects of the, to retune the two hemispheres?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think if you've now, do either of you know the book? No?
No.
No.
No, okay. Haven't heard of that one. Maybe give us some more information on that. Yeah, okay. Are there many integration therapists available?
Um,
Kevin, yeah.
Again, I can think of a few in Ireland. I can think of a few psychotherapists that I know who are psychedelic friendly, because I'm sure there's more, but just personally, I only know a few. Psychotherapy as a profession is very conservative, and the training is conservative, and it's going to take quite a lot of time before that changes.
Yeah.
There's definitely many people coming in who are very, very interested in this field, so it will change and is changing.
Finola, I'm just going to paraphrase your question there. You're coming out of a PTSD after a big trauma 2 years ago. You really feel like you're over the hard part. Would it be safe for you to do this journey on your own? What's your comment on that, Rob?
Couldn't answer that question I'd really have to talk to you like in depth about whether it is safe for you to do it on your own. It really depends on your own inner strength, I suppose, and ability to, and to go through a catharsis on your own, I think will be very challenging. I certainly have had experiences through being, especially with ayahuasca, where I'm very, very glad that I wasn't on my own, that someone was there when you really are going through something very difficult. Having someone there is very important.
Sure. I think as well, that's a really important part of our retreat, that we have really a high facilitator ratio to participants. So in all of our psilocybin sessions, we have 4 facilitators with max 12 people. So we really have this personal attentive care, where we can really sit and offer you a lot of presence, in the form of holding your hand, being there present beside you, giving you tissues, water, whatever your basic needs are too, and just being that sort of steady support to help anchor the experience for you too. So I think that's a really, really big part of why we run the retreat, is just having this experience facilitation to help people to really go as deep as they need, knowing that there is somebody literally right beside them in case they're having a hard time.
Yeah, I'd like to share with you a quote by Ivor Brown, actually, on this from The Frozen Present. He said about psychedelic therapy in general, that the first aspect is that the person feels safe enough in themselves that they can do the work. And then even more important, the second aspect is that they feel that the therapist is safe enough to handle whatever might come up. And I think that's quite an interesting comment in that, yeah, stuff comes up that can be quite hard to hold as a therapist. Stuff can really come up for people. And I think it's important you have someone who understands that or knows that, knows that terrain.
Yeah, very important. That comment you had about swimming in the waters, they were the same waters essentially. That's a brilliant quote. Because your own perception of it, like if somebody turns into an elephant in a room and is looking at you with an elephant head and you don't know what's going on and you freak out, whereas another person could see that as just part of the trip, part of the healing, part of the integration. It's a real.
But it's very interesting.
Yeah,
it's very interesting you mentioned that, because we had literally that experience on the last retreat where I went over to one of the therapists, and he saw me as an elephant. He saw me, Ganesh, yeah, Geraldine. He saw me as an elephant in that moment. Now I definitely was not an elephant, but that's how he saw me,
Yeah.
And these things happen. And navigating, like it's the responsibility, and it's a lot, it's beautiful, but it's by no means an easy thing to do, I don't think. That's
Was
my
he
sense.
was he freaking out in that moment, or was he able to contain that?
No, he was containing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was containing it. I mean, the removing of obstacles would be a good way of putting it. He was going through very much a very deep process of getting rid of some serious obstacles.
Yeah, just a note on the book there at the end that we had earlier on. The book is a deep investigation into how the two hemispheres see the world in two distinct ways, but has become left dominant, more reductionist and analytical in the West, and how that has affected Western civilization. We're losing out on nature and mystical. That's a very good comment. Yeah, sounds like an interesting book. Might pick that one up. We'll be winding up soon. Any other comment on that book, lads, or that
No,
comment?
but that sounds a very interesting book. But just to mention, so tonight we're really speaking the language of science and psychology, I suppose, and we're doing that consciously. But that our core essence is really that we feel like we're connecting into a deeper connection to the land of Ireland and our own ancestral heritage. And this medicine of psilocybin grows everywhere in Ireland. So no one can say to us that this wasn't part of, it would have been part at one time of our ancestral ways, I suppose. And it's to really recognize that. And we're a deeply mystical people in Ireland, and we have a deep connection to the land. So I think this is very much part of it.
Yeah, is it Leanne there is saying the work being done around those with terminal illness is also really amazing. Where's that happening? That kind of work, is that happening mainly in the States?
Well, I can talk about
Melbourne, and also in Canada as well. And Oregon.
And I had the privilege last year, I don't think you'll mind sharing, but a friend of mine died last year, an elder by the name of Henri Rowan, a very beautiful and mystical man who knew everything about the Irish language, and he was a pioneer of this work in Ireland, shall we say. I experienced a ceremony with him. He was dying very much in the late stages of cancer. He was on his way out, and we journeyed together, and we had this experience where you could see the soul leaving his body. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. You could actually see it, and he could see it too, because the look on his face was, it was a really special thing.
Wow. Yeah, Farah is asking, do you do private sessions, Rob?
Yeah, doing one-to-one sessions. You can reach me I'll just talk my email here, and Dara as well.
Drop your email in there. You've already dropped in the retreat center, Dara. That's great. While Rob is doing that, would you just let people know some of the dates for next year, the retreats that are coming up?
Well, they could see that on our website. Probably as best, is it, Dara?
Yeah, so our next retreat is in February. We're taking a bit of a winter break with all the second wave of lockdown. So February, March, April, May, and June will be our first retreats, and then we'll be putting up the dates for the second half of the year at the start of next year. Would also like to offer everybody 10% off our retreats if you book in by the end of December. So that'll be valid for any of the retreats that are up on our website, and that will be valid till the end of December. And yeah, some people use that code at the last Positive Nights talk, so it's going to be Positive Nights again. You can pop it in when you're filling out your application form. Also, like Rob mentioned, if anybody's really struggling financially, we do have a heavily discounted place on each of our retreats, and that is first come, first served. So if you think you qualify for that, drop us an email, and we have one spot per retreat where we try and bring a person on at a really heavily discounted price. So do pop in an application if you think that's you, and whatever dates you're looking at.
We'll finish off, I think, on this question from Chris. He's wondering if you could help him. He used to be vegan and he loved nature, but after some mushroom trips, he's now a Wall Street banker and eats meat 5 times a week. That's quite a transformation you went through there, Chris. And your question is, do you think I should do more trips?
Well, your question's very funny. Thanks for that. But it you know something?
It was a gag. It was a gag. It was a good gag. I like it.
Well, it's actually happening, because now like Wall Street are actually taking an interest in this. So that's bringing its own issues. Like when we started out a couple of years ago, we started getting all these emails from kind of very much corporate finance types looking to. We basically told them all to go away. Maybe that was a mistake, but yeah.
The website is inwardbound.ie, Leanne. Inwardbound.ie.
Or .nl as well. I think we have.
Yeah. .nl as well. Okay.
Yeah,
before we finish, lads, any comment you want to say to people as we leave?
Rob, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, sorry. No. You go ahead, Dara.
Yeah, no, like I think I pretty much covered it all there. Just to plug as well, I have a talk on the 4th of December around identification of mushrooms, microdosing, growing, and the history of psilocybin. So if anybody's interested in coming to that, I'll pop it in the chat. But other than that, please do reach out. Also, if you know anybody who has been struggling from a plant medicine experience or a psychedelic experience, and we can hopefully point them in the direction of, a psychedelic friendly therapist. It's really important that, the stigmas are reducing, and the less we judge people for having these experiences, the better. It's going to become more and more prevalent, especially as it's seen as a legitimate modality of healing. So, the safety and the sort of post-care is still catching up, but please do always drop us an email if you hear of anybody having a hard time.
Thanks for that joke, Chris. That was a good joke. You got me there. That was funny. Okay, so East Forest, great music. Thanks, Geraldine. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. Thanks to the lads for doing this tonight. Some great information, and I hope people got a lot out of it. Well done, folks. I'm just going to do a short meditation again to finish up. At the very end, Dara and, wow, someone coming in now. Come on in for the meditation anyway. At the very end, Dara and Rob, if you guys could hang on just at the end, we'll have a quick chat at the end, myself and yourself. This will also be available to people after the event as well. We'll put it out tomorrow and we'll put it on YouTube. We have a recording of it as well. So we'll send the link to anybody who missed it live tomorrow. Okay. So we'll just drop in again just to kind of integrate that information that you heard tonight. Just drop into your heart center, put your hand on your heart. Just get a sense of all the people on the Zoom call. Get a sense of the connection tonight. And we'll send some appreciation to Dara and Rob for their wisdom and for the work that they do in this world. And now just send that energy of appreciation to everybody here on the Zoom call. Feel that connection with all the other participants. Get a sense of a common vision for the world with like-minded people that we'd like to create. A sense of nature, a sense of togetherness, a sense of community, a sense of healing, a sense of sovereignty. As you open your eyes, feel yourself grounded in your body. Thank you all again for joining in tonight. We'll have another event next Thursday. We have quite an amazing guest. She claims to be one of only 5 people on the planet who is assisting with the shift in consciousness right now. Her name is the Oracle Girl, and she doesn't take any prisoners. She's hardcore, and if you feel like you want to hear some really fascinating information, please do tune in. We'll post it in all the usual places. Well, thank you, folks. I'm going to hang on with the 2 lads here just for a quick chat, but just thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for listening.
Thank you, everybody.